The crystalline frost burned Varine's azure skin as she dragged herself across the abandoned outpost's landing pad. Each labored breath formed clouds of vapor in the thin, frigid atmosphere, disappearing like the last vestiges of her hope. The pain from her wounds, inflicted by those who once called her family, pulsed with each of her 3 hearts. They had left her here to die, on this forgotten rock at the edge of the Verge Nebula. Unstable, they had called her. Too powerful. A threat to the lineage. The Drixian High Council, her own blood relations, had decreed her abilities too dangerous to control. The psionic energy that coursed through her tall, lithe frame had always marked her as different, even among a species known for their mental powers. But where others could merely sense emotions or move small objects, Varine could shatter minds and crush metal with a thought when provoked. She had never asked for such power. Had spent her 27 cycles trying to contain it, to be worthy of the proud Drixian warrior tradition. But fear had won out over family bonds. They had sedated her, stripped her of resources, and abandoned her on this decommissioned mining station with atmosphere systems failing and temperatures plummeting. Varine's 3rd heart faltered, sending waves of nausea through her body. The thin protective membrane covering her skin, a Drixian's natural defense, was crystallizing in the cold. When it shattered, death would follow quickly. She closed her large, silver eyes, 4-fingered hands clutching at the frozen metal beneath her. This was not how a warrior should die. The sudden roar of engines cut through her fading consciousness. A ship. Small, by the sound of it. Perhaps scavengers coming to strip the outpost of remaining technology. Varine forced her eyes open, the lids cracking painfully as they broke their thin layer of ice. Through the swirling snow, she saw a vessel touching down, sleek, practical, with the unmistakable design aesthetics of human engineering. The ramp descended, and a figure emerged, bundled against the cold. Shorter than her by nearly a foot, but moving with purpose. The human approached, then stopped abruptly upon seeing her. Even in her state, Varine recognized the universal posture of surprise and caution. The human, male, she guessed from the build, spoke into a communication device, then cautiously approached again. "Hello? Can you understand me?" His voice carried through the thin air, translator technology converting his words. Varine tried to respond, but her voice apparatus had begun to freeze. She managed only a rasping sound as her 3rd heart stuttered again. The human came closer, scanner in hand. "You're Drixian." The outpost registry didn't mention any. He stopped, the scanner beeping frantically. "You're dying." Varine felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. Even now, faced with a member of a species that should fear her kind, the universe mocked her with obvious observations. What happened next defied everything she knew about interspecies relations. The human removed his outer garment and draped it over her. Then, ignoring all protocols about the dangers of touching a Drixian, especially one with psionic abilities, he placed his gloved hands under her shoulders. "I'm Ethan Reed. I'm going to help you." His voice was steady, determined. "My ship has medical facilities. Can you move at all?" The touch, even through layers of fabric, sent a shock through Varine's system. No one touched Drixians. No one. Their psionic abilities made physical contact dangerous, unpredictable. Especially for someone like her. Yet this human, this Ethan Reed, was attempting to lift her. "Don't." She managed to rasp, her translator flickering. "Dangerous." "I know what the xenobiology texts say about your kind," Ethan replied, struggling with her weight. "But you'll die if you stay here, and I didn't come halfway across the galaxy to leave someone to freeze to death." With a strength belying his smaller frame, he began to drag her toward his ship. Each movement sent spikes of pain through her crystallizing membrane, but also spread warmth from his touch, a sensation so foreign she couldn't process it. "Why?" she whispered as they reached the ramp. Ethan paused, his breath clouding between them. His eyes, a startling blue against his brown skin, met hers without fear. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply. "We help." As darkness claimed her, Varine's last conscious thought was of the impossible warmth of the first touch she'd experienced in years, and how this alien, this human, seemed unaware that he had just done what no one in the galaxy had ever dared. Varine awoke to the soft hum of medical equipment. Her 3 hearts beat in steady rhythm, no longer faltering. The crystallization of her protective membrane had been halted, though her azure skin still felt raw and tender. She was alive, a fact that surprised her more than the unfamiliar ceiling above. "Our patient's awake," announced a female voice. Varine turned her head, vision clearing to reveal a human woman with dark hair pulled back tightly, wearing a medical uniform. She was keeping a deliberate distance from the biobed. "I'm Dr. Nadia Volkov, Chief Medical Officer of the research vessel Horizon." Her tone was professional, wary. "You've been unconscious for 36 hours. Varine attempted to sit up, but found her limbs weak. "The human. Ethan Reed. Captain Reed is on the bridge. He'll want to know you're conscious." Dr. Volkov tapped a communication panel. "Captain, your guest is awake." Varine noticed the hesitation. It was familiar, the caution others always showed around her kind. Yet this human doctor had treated her, saved her life. The contradiction was puzzling. Minutes later, Ethan Reed entered the medical bay. He was smaller than she remembered, his frame compact but sturdy by human standards. Without the bulky cold-weather gear, she could see his features clearly: warm brown skin, short black hair with flecks of silver at the temples, and those startling blue eyes that held her gaze directly. "Good to see you awake," he said, approaching her bed with none of the caution the doctor displayed. "You had us worried." "Captain," Dr. Volkov warned, "remember the briefing about Drixian contact protocols." Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "Those protocols didn't seem to matter when I carried her aboard." He stood beside Varine's bed, close enough that she could sense the faint electrical signals from his nervous system. "How are you feeling?" "Functional," Varine replied, the translator implanted in her throat converting her natural harmonic speech to human language. "Why did you save me?" Ethan's expression shifted to something Varine couldn't read. "I told you on the outpost. It's what we do." "Not with Drixians," she countered. "Your species fears mine." "With good reason." "Yeah, well." Ethan shrugged. "I've never been good at following conventional wisdom." "Got a name?" "Varine. Third lineage of House Drixtalon." "Just, Varine is fine." He smiled, a human expression she recognized as meant to convey friendliness. "Want to tell me why a member of a noble Drixian house was dying alone on an abandoned outpost?" The memory sent a spike of pain through her that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. "I was discarded. Deemed too dangerous." Dr. Volkov, monitoring from across the room, made a small sound. "Captain, the scans show extremely high psionic potential. Higher than any recorded Drixian in the database." "I am aware of what I am," Varine said, a thread of bitterness entering her voice. "My family was also, quite aware." Ethan pulled a stool closer and sat beside her bed. The casual movement, the proximity, it was disorienting. No one had ever been this comfortable near her, not even her own kind. "Your family exiled you because of your abilities?" Varine's silver eyes focused on the ceiling. "They feared what they could not control. After the incident at the conclave, they decided elimination was safer than containment." "They tried to kill you?" Ethan's voice sharpened. "Death would have been more honorable," she replied. "They chose abandonment instead. A slower death, but one that wouldn't contaminate their sacred grounds with my blood." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft beeping of medical equipment. Vereen could sense the doctor's fear spike, could almost taste the electromagnetic changes in the air as the human processed what she'd said. But Ethan's bioelectrical signature remained steady. Curious, even. Well, he finally said, their loss is our gain. Once you're recovered, we could use someone with your skills. Vereen turned to stare at him, confusion overwhelming her usual stoicism. You want my help? Knowing what I am? I know you're a survivor, Ethan replied. And my research expedition could use someone who understands this sector better than we do. We're studying quantum anomalies in the Verge Nebula, peaceful work. Your crew will not approve. Dr. Volkov cleared her throat pointedly, confirming Vereen's statement. Ethan stood, smiling again. Let me worry about the crew. You focus on healing. As he turned to leave, Vereen felt a strange impulse she couldn't explain. Ethan Reed. When he paused, looking back, she continued, on the outpost. You touched me. No one touches Drixians. So I've been told. He looked down at his own hands, then back at her. Did it hurt you? No, she said, bewildered by the question. But it could have harmed you. My abilities seem to be under your control from what I can tell, he finished for her. Rest now. We'll talk more later. After he left, Dr. Volkov approached cautiously to adjust the medical equipment. He's always been reckless, she muttered, more to herself than to Vereen. Brilliant, but reckless. He is unusual for a human, Vereen observed. The doctor paused, her expression softening slightly. The captain lost his family in the Centauri conflict. He sees value in things, and people, others discard. Her eyes met Vereen's briefly. Just, don't make him regret helping you. When Vereen was alone again, she raised one four-fingered hand before her face, studying it in the soft light of the medical bay. The hand that no one had dared to touch in years. The hand that could crush metal and manipulate energy with a thought. Yet a human had grasped it without fear, offering warmth when her world had gone cold. For the first time since her exile began, Vereen felt something stir within her, something dangerously close to hope. And as her three hearts beat in their steady rhythm, she wondered if perhaps being discarded had led her not to an end, but to a beginning. 3 weeks aboard the Horizon had taught Vereen more about humans than all the Drixian cultural databases combined. They were loud, emotional, and inexplicably resilient. They touched constantly, casual brushes of hands when passing tools, embraces of greeting or farewell, pats on shoulders during conversation. Each time she witnessed these interactions, Vereen felt like an anthropologist studying an alien species, which, she supposed, she was. Most of the crew had gradually accepted her presence, though they maintained a respectful distance. All except Ethan Reed, who seemed determined to treat her as he would any crew member. You're brooding again, Ethan said, interrupting her thoughts as she stood at the observation deck, watching the swirling colors of the Verge Nebula outside. Credit for your thoughts? I am not brooding, Vereen replied, her translator giving her words a slightly defensive tone. I am contemplating the quantum variations in the nebula's outer boundary. Ethan leaned against the railing beside her, close enough that she could feel the faint heat radiating from his body. Right. That's why you're scowling at the stars like they personally offended you. Despite herself, Vereen felt the corners of her mouth twitch, a gesture she'd picked up from the humans. Your species anthropomorphizes everything. Part of our charm. He smiled, then grew serious. The crew's weekly game night is tonight. You should join us. Vereen stiffened. I do not play games. Everyone plays games, Vereen. Some are just more honest about it than others. He turned to face her fully. It would help the crew get more comfortable with you. They are right to be uncomfortable, she said quietly. Yesterday, I bent a bulkhead support when Chief Engineer Taub startled me. And then you helped her reinforce it, saving us hours of work. Ethan's eyes held hers. You're not defined by what you can destroy, Vereen. Before she could respond, the ship's alert system blared to life. Red emergency lights bathed the observation deck. Captain to the bridge, Lieutenant Riker's voice came over the calm, unidentified vessel on intercept course. They're not responding to hails. Ethan was already moving. On my way. He glanced back at Vereen. Come with me. The bridge was a flurry of activity when they arrived. Lieutenant Riker, a stern-faced human with russet skin, yielded the captain's chair to Ethan. Report, Ethan ordered, settling into command with an ease Vereen admired. Ship appeared on long-range sensors 15 minutes ago, sir. They've been accelerating directly toward us since. Configuration matches nothing in our database. Ethan nodded. Tactical display. A holographic projection appeared above the central console. Vereen felt her 3 hearts stutter at the sight of the approaching vessel. That is a Krevenar mercenary ship, she said, voice hollow. All eyes turned to her. You're sure? Ethan asked. I am certain. She stepped closer to the display, studying its configuration. They are hunters. Expensive ones. Understanding dawned on Ethan's face. Your family sent them. They would not leave loose ends, Vereen confirmed, a cold dread settling in her gut. Captain Reed, should leave your vessel. They want only me. Not happening, Ethan replied instantly. Lieutenant Riker, shields to maximum. Plot an evasive course through the denser parts of the nebula. Sir, Riker protested, we're a research vessel. Our shields won't hold against a military-grade attack. Then we'll have to be faster and smarter. Ethan turned to his tactical officer. Ash, what weapons do we have? Standard defensive phasers and 2 torpedo launchers, sir. Hardly a match for mercenaries. Vereen watched the humans preparing for battle, for her sake. It was incomprehensible. On Drix, the logical choice would be to sacrifice the one for the many. You should surrender me, she said, loud enough for the bridge crew to hear. I am not worth your lives. The sudden silence was broken by Ethan's firm voice. No one on my ship gets left behind or handed over. Not negotiable. The tactical officer, Ash, gave Vereen an appraising look. The Drixian might be our best weapon, Captain. If her psionic abilities are as strong as the med scans suggest. I will not use her as a weapon, Ethan cut in sharply. I would do it, Vereen said quietly. If it meant protecting this ship. Before Ethan could respond, the ship rocked violently as the first shots from the mercenary vessel struck their shields. Direct hit. Riker called out. Shields at 87%. Ethan gripped the arms of his chair. Return fire. Target their weapons systems only. The horizon shuddered as it fired back, the shots dissipating harmlessly against the mercenary ship's superior shields. No effect, sir, Ash reported grimly. Another blast hit them, stronger this time. A console at the back of the bridge exploded in a shower of sparks. Shields at 62%, Riker announced. They're hailing us now. Ethan's jaw tightened. On screen. The view of the nebula was replaced by the image of a Krevenar mercenary, reptilian, with crimson scales and yellow eyes set in a face designed for intimidation. Human vessel, the mercenary commander hissed. You harbor a fugitive of House Drix-Talon. Surrender the Drixian female and you may proceed unharmed. Ethan stood, posture defiant. This is Captain Ethan Reed of the Earth Science vessel Horizon. We have no fugitives aboard, only crew members and invited guests. The Krevenar's lipless mouth curved in what might have been a smile. You lie poorly, human. We tracked her beacon to your vessel. Vereen felt a cold shock ripple through her. Beacon? She stepped forward, into view of the communication screen. What beacon? The mercenary's yellow eyes fixed on her. The one embedded in your tertiary heart during your last medical examination on Drix. Your family was quite thorough in ensuring you could be found, should their initial plan fail. Rage flared within Vereen, bright, hot, and dangerous. Around her, the metal components of the bridge began to vibrate. Lights flickered. The very air seemed to grow dense with energy. She felt a hand on her arm, warm, steady. Ethan. Easy, he murmured. Not like this. The touch anchored her, drawing her back from the precipice of destruction. The vibrations stilled. You have 10 minutes to surrender the Drixian, the Crevenaar announced. Or we will disable your vessel and take her by force. The communication cut off. The bridge erupted in urgent activity. Ethan turned to Dr. Volkov, who had arrived during the confrontation. Can you locate and remove this beacon? He demanded. The doctor nodded grimly. Yes, but it would require surgery. More time than we have. Then we need another plan. Ethan faced Vereen. Any weaknesses in Crevenaar ships we should know about? Vereen studied the tactical display, thinking rapidly. Their sensor array is vulnerable. If damaged, their targeting systems would be compromised. Good. Ash, focus all firepower on their sensor array. Ethan turned back to Vereen, his expression determined. I need to know, can you use your abilities to help us without endangering yourself or my crew? It was the first time anyone had asked her permission to use her powers, rather than fearing or exploiting them. Something shifted within Vereen in that moment, a decision crystallizing with the clarity of absolute certainty. Yes, she said simply. I can help. As the mercenary ship closed in for the kill, Vereen closed her silver eyes and, for the first time in her life, deliberately unleashed the power she had spent a lifetime containing, not in rage or fear, but with purpose. To protect. To save. To finally touch back. The medical bay was quiet except for the soft whirring of equipment monitoring Vereen's vital signs. Dr. Volkov had completed the emergency surgery to remove the tracking beacon from her tertiary heart, a delicate procedure made possible only by the precious time Vereen had bought them. She redirected an energy beam with her mind, Ash was saying in the corridor outside, voice filled with awe. I've never seen anything like it. The way she just reached out and curved that weapon's trajectory back toward their sensor array. At great personal cost, Dr. Volkov replied, her tone somber. The psionic exertion nearly killed her. Vereen could hear them clearly, her Drixian senses heightened even in her weakened state. They spoke of her as though she had performed some miracle, when all she had done was channel the power that had made her an outcast among her own kind. The door slid open, and Ethan entered. His uniform was still scorched from the battle, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. Yet his steps were steady as he approached her bedside. How's our hero doing? He asked, settling onto the stool beside her. I am not a hero, Vereen responded, voice raspy through the translator. I merely prevented my problems from destroying your ship. Nadia says you'll make a full recovery. He ignored her protest. The beacon is gone. You're free. Free. Such a simple word for such a complex concept. Free from being tracked, perhaps. But free from being Drixian? From being dangerous? From being alone? Vereen wasn't certain such freedom existed. The mercenaries will report back to my family, she said. They will send others. Let them try. A fierce protectiveness colored Ethan's voice. We've altered course for Starbase 47. The horizon needs repairs, and the crew deserves shore leave after that encounter. Vereen turned to look at him properly. Your ship was damaged because of me. Your crew was endangered because of me. Yet you still offer sanctuary. The crew is calling you the horizon's guardian angel, you know. A small smile played at his lips. Especially Ash. I think they're planning to name the new defensive protocols after you. They should fear me. Vereen closed her silver eyes briefly. What I did to that ship, I could do to the horizon. To any of you. But you won't. The simple certainty in his words drew her eyes open again. How can you be so sure? Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because I've seen how carefully you move around the crew. How you hold yourself back when someone startles you. How you flinch from casual contact. His gaze held hers. You're not afraid of hurting others because you lose control, Vereen. You're afraid because you've never been allowed to believe you have control. The insight struck her like a physical blow. No Drixian had ever understood her so clearly, not her family, not the High Council, not even herself. When I was 12 cycles old, she said softly, my youngest sister tried to embrace me after I won a scholarly competition. It was forbidden, but she was young and impulsive. My surprised reaction shattered every crystal fixture in the hall. The memory surfaced with painful clarity. She never came near me again. No one did. Until a stubborn human on a frozen outpost, Ethan added. Yes. Vereen studied his face. Why were you not afraid? Oh, I was terrified, he admitted with a short laugh. But not of you. Of failing to help when I could have. A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside the viewport, stars streaked by as the horizon traveled at warp speed toward safety. The quiet moment felt precious to Vereen, a rare bubble of peace in a lifetime of isolation. May I try something? Ethan asked suddenly. Vereen tilted her head questioningly. Give me your hand, he said. Alarm flashed through her. That would be unwise. Humor me. He held out his own hand, palm up, waiting. Vereen stared at the offered hand. On Drix, such a gesture would be seen as either profound ignorance or a death wish. But they were not on Drix, and Ethan Reed was unlike anyone she had ever known. Slowly, cautiously, she extended her four-fingered hand. It hovered above his, trembling slightly. I won't break, Ethan said gently. I might break you, she countered. I trust you. 3 words, so simply spoken, yet they contained a universe of meaning. Vereen lowered her hand until it rested in his. The contact sent a current of sensation up her arm, not unpleasant, merely intense after so long without touch. Ethan's fingers curled around hers carefully. His skin was warmer than hers, softer, with a completely different texture. She could feel his pulse through the contact, steady and strong. See, he said softly. The ship's still in one piece. A sound escaped Vereen that surprised them both, something between a laugh and a sob. You are either very brave or very foolish. I've been called both. His thumb moved gently across the back of her hand, sending another wave of sensation through her. The universe is cold, Vereen. We all need warmth to survive. In that moment, something fundamental shifted within her. The power that had always felt like a curse, a destructive force to be contained, resonated differently under his touch. It felt quieter. More like a current than a storm. When my family sent those mercenaries, she said, finding words for emotions she had never been permitted to express, I expected your crew to surrender me. It would have been logical. Efficient. Human decisions aren't always based on logic. His hand remained steady in hers. So I have observed. Vereen hesitated, then continued. When the attack came, and you refused to hand me over, it was the first time since childhood that I felt. She searched for the right word. Valued. Ethan's eyes softened. You are valued, Vereen. Not for your power or your knowledge, but for who you are. And who am I, if not a weapon? If not a Drixian exile? That's something only you can answer. He squeezed her hand gently. But I can tell you what I see, someone with incredible strength who chooses to be gentle. Someone who survived being treated as a thing but still remembers how to be a person. The medical bay door slid open again, and Dr. Volkov entered. She stopped short at the sight of their joined hands, eyes widening. Captain, that's not, she began. Perfectly safe, Ethan finished for her, though he released Vereen's hand. Just proving a point about interspecies connection. Dr. Volkov looked skeptical but focused on her patient. Your vital signs have stabilized remarkably well. The tertiary heart rhythm is back to normal, and there's no sign of rejection from the surgical site. She glanced at her medical scanner. Your psionic readings are different, though. Different how? Ethan asked. More harmonized. The doctor looked puzzled. Less chaotic than before. Vereen felt no surprise at this assessment. The change the doctor detected with instruments, she felt in her very essence. For the first time since her abilities had manifested, the power within her felt like a current that could be channeled rather than a tempest that might destroy her. We'll reach Starbase 47 in approximately 10 hours, Dr. Volkov continued. I've arranged for a specialist there to consult on your case. After the doctor left, Ethan stood. I should check on the bridge. Get some rest. As he turned to leave, Vereen called out, Ethan. When he paused, she said simply, thank you. He smiled, that warm human expression she was growing to appreciate. For what? For daring to touch what everyone else feared. His eyes held hers for a long moment. Some fears are worth overcoming. With that, he departed, leaving Vereen with a sensation she had never expected to feel again. Hope, not as a distant concept, but as a tangible warmth, like the lingering impression of a human hand against her alien skin. The ornate spires of the Drixian diplomatic vessel loomed through the viewport of the Horizon's shuttle bay. 6 months had passed since the mercenary attack, 6 months of repairs, training, and preparation. 6 months of Vereen learning to exist not as a weapon or an exile, but as part of a crew. As part of a community. They've accepted our request for parley, Lieutenant Riker reported, looking up from the communications console. Though they're insisting only Captain Reed and Vereen board their vessel. Ethan nodded, adjusting the formal diplomatic uniform he rarely wore. As expected. It's a trap, Chief Engineer Tao said bluntly, her dark eyes concerned. You know that, right? Of course it's a trap, Ethan replied. But it's also our best chance to end this permanently. Vereen stood slightly apart from the human crew, dressed in traditional Drixian formal attire that Dr. Volkov had helped her replicate. The flowing silver garments marked her status as a member of the third lineage, though she had long since stopped identifying with her house. The irony wasn't lost on her, to confront those who had discarded her, she must look the part they had denied her. Are you sure about this? Ash asked her quietly, having approached while the others discussed tactical details. Over the past months, the tactical officer had become something of a friend, fascinated by Vereen's abilities rather than fearful of them. I am certain, Vereen replied. My family will not stop pursuing me. This confrontation was inevitable from the moment they marked me for elimination. Ash nodded, then surprised Vereen by extending a hand. Good luck out there. Vereen accepted the handshake without hesitation, a small gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. Thank you, Ash. Ethan finished his briefing and approached. Ready? Yes. Vereen met his gaze steadily. Though I still believe you should remain aboard the Horizon. This is my battle. We've been over this, he said with a wry smile. Partners face danger together. Partners. The word carried layers of meaning that still amazed her. In the months since Starbase 47, their connection had deepened into something neither of them had names for, something beyond captain and crew, beyond human and Drixian. Something that defied categorization but felt more real than any relationship Vereen had ever known. The shuttle journey to the Drixian vessel was brief and silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they docked, Ethan reached for her hand, his touch now familiar and grounding. "Remember," he said quietly, "no matter what happens in there, you are not alone anymore." The Drixian diplomatic chamber was exactly as Vereen remembered from her youth, austere, crystalline, designed to intimidate with its cold perfection. 5 members of the High Council awaited them, including matriarch Celerine, head of House Drixtalon and Vereen's maternal progenitor. "So," Celerine said as they entered, her silver eyes, so like Vereen's own, revealing nothing. "The exile returns, with a human protector." Her gaze flickered dismissively over Ethan. How predictably sentimental. Vereen inclined her head slightly, not the full bow of submission expected of her, but an acknowledgement. "Matriarch. Counselors. I come to resolve our conflict." "There is no conflict to resolve," said Counselor Vex, the oldest of the assembled Drixians. "You were judged unstable. That judgment stands." "Yet here I stand before you," Vereen replied, demonstrating more stability and control than you believed possible. "Accompanied by a human who knows nothing of Drixian power," Celerine countered. "Did you tell him what happened at the conclave? How many died because of your lack of control?" Ethan stepped forward. "Vereen has told me everything. Including how your family's treatments destabilized her abilities rather than helping her control them." A ripple of surprise passed through the council members. Celerine's posture stiffened. "You speak of matters beyond your comprehension, human." "I speak of deliberate sabotage," Ethan said firmly. The medical specialists at Starbase 47 confirmed it. The procedures performed on Vereen throughout her childhood were designed not to help her manage her abilities, but to make them more volatile. More weaponized. Vereen had known this truth for months now, yet hearing it spoken aloud in this chamber still sent a chill through her 3 hearts. "You never intended for me to succeed in controlling my power," she said to her family. "You wanted a weapon you could control through fear." Celerine rose, her tall form imposing. "And when we realized we could not control you, we did what was necessary for the safety of our house." "You tried to kill your own daughter," Ethan said, disgust evident in his voice. "We sought to correct a mistake," Counselor Vex replied coldly. Vereen felt the old rage rising within her, the familiar storm of power responding to her emotions. But now, after months of training with Ethan and the specialists at Starbase 47, the storm no longer threatened to consume her. Instead, it flowed through channels she had created, disciplined and directed. "I am not a mistake to be corrected," she said, her voice steady despite the power crackling just beneath her skin. "I am what you made me, and what I have remade myself to be." With deliberate control, she extended her hand. The crystalline table between them vibrated, then rose smoothly into the air. It rotated once, twice, before settling back exactly where it had been, a demonstration of precision that would have been impossible for her before. "Impossible," whispered one of the counselors. "No," Vereen replied. "Simply the result of proper training and acceptance, rather than fear and manipulation." Celerine's expression hardened. "If you believe this parlor trick proves anything." She was interrupted by a subtle shift in the room's lighting. The hidden security forces the council had stationed around the chamber suddenly found their weapons floating out of their hands, dozens of them, suspended in the air around the room. "I sensed your guards the moment we entered," Vereen said calmly. "Just as I detect the neural disruptors you've concealed beneath the table, and the emergency transport beacons you're all wearing." The weapons rotated in unison, then neatly disassembled themselves, parts floating down to form orderly piles on the floor. Ethan watched with an expression balanced between amazement and pride. This was Vereen as she was meant to be, powerful yet controlled, formidable yet measured. "We have not come to threaten," he said, addressing the visibly disturbed council. "We've come to negotiate terms." "We do not negotiate with exiles," Celerine began, but Councillor Vex raised a hand to silence her. "What terms?" the elder Drixian asked, eyes fixed on Vereen with new consideration. "Acknowledge that I am no longer under Drixian jurisdiction," Vereen said. "Revoke the elimination order. In return, I will not expose House Drixtalan's attempts to create bioweapons from their own bloodline, a clear violation of the Galactic Concordat." "You have no proof," Celerine hissed. "I have my medical records," Vereen countered. "And I have witnesses to your mercenaries' attack on a peaceful research vessel." How would the other houses react to learning how the revered House Drixtalan truly maintains its position? The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Finally, Councillor Vex nodded slowly. "You were always the most intelligent of your lineage," he said. "Your terms are acceptable. The High Council will declare you severed from House Drixtalan, with all the legal separations that entails. You will no longer be hunted. But neither will you ever be welcomed home," Celerine added, a final barb. Vereen felt Ethan's presence beside her, solid and warm in the cold chamber. "I already have a home," she replied simply. The formal declaration took less than an hour to complete. Bureaucracy moved swiftly when the alternative was scandal. When it was done, Vereen stood before her former family one last time, now legally disconnected from her house, her past, and her people. "There is one more thing," she said as they prepared to depart. "I wish to meet my youngest sister. Briefly. Alone." Celerine began to object, but to everyone's surprise, a slender Drixian female stepped forward from the shadows at the back of the chamber. Naravi, once Vereen's closest sibling, now nearly a stranger after years of separation. "I am here," she said softly. The council members withdrew, leaving the sisters facing each other. Ethan squeezed Vereen's hand once before following, giving them privacy. "You look, well," Naravi said hesitantly. "Different." "I am different," Vereen acknowledged. "Happier. Stronger. The human, he is important to you." It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." Vereen studied her sister's face, searching for the child who had once reached out to her without fear. "He taught me that what makes me different need not make me dangerous." Naravi looked down. "I should have defended you. When they sent you away, I should have spoken against it. You were young. I was afraid." Naravi's silver eyes lifted, filled with regret. "Not of you. Of being like you. Of showing any sign that I, too, might have stronger abilities than permitted." Understanding dawned on Vereen. "You have been hiding your talents." A barely perceptible nod. "It was safer that way. After seeing what they did to you." Vereen felt a surge of protective instinct for this sister who had once abandoned her, this sister who might face the same fate. Without thinking, she extended her hand. Naravi stared at the offered hand in shock. "We cannot," she whispered, the lifetime of Drixian prohibition evident in her voice. "We can," Vereen replied gently. "If we choose to." For a long moment, Naravi remained frozen in place. Then, with trembling hesitation, she reached out. Their fingertips touched, then their palms pressed together, the first contact between them since childhood. No disaster followed. No uncontrolled burst of psionic energy. Just the simple, profound connection of two beings who had been taught to fear their own touch. "How?" Naravi asked, wonder in her voice. "Practice," Vereen said with a small smile. "And letting go of fear." She squeezed her sister's hand once before releasing it. "If you ever need help, if your abilities become too difficult to hide, find the Earth Science vessel Horizon. You will be welcomed there. Tears, a rare sight among Drixians, glistened in Naravi's eyes. Be well, sister. You as well, Vereen replied. When she rejoined Ethan in the corridor, he studied her face carefully. Everything okay? Yes, she said, and meant it. I have said my goodbyes. As they boarded the shuttle to return to the horizon, to return home, Ethan took her hand, his touch now as familiar as her own heartbeats. Well, technically you're no longer a Drixian citizen, he said with a smile. Any thoughts on what comes next? Vereen looked out at the stars, the same cold, distant points of light that had witnessed her abandonment, her rescue, and now her rebirth. They no longer seemed quite so cold. I believe, she said, fingers intertwining with his, that I would like to explore what it means to build something new. Something that is neither fully Drixian nor fully human, but uniquely ours. Ethan's smile deepened as he understood her meaning. I think that sounds like a worthy mission. One that might take a lifetime to fully explore. Then it is fortunate, Vereen replied, allowing herself a rare smile, that I have decided to stay. As the shuttle departed the diplomatic vessel, Vereen felt the final threads of her old life fall away. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges, and the ongoing journey of understanding her abilities. But also connection. Purpose. Belonging. And the warmth of hands that had dared to touch her when all others had turned away.